This week's parashah is Toldot. Of course, it can be interpreted in a couple ways. It can be generations. It can also mean genealogy. And we find our portion taken out of Genesis 25, starting in verse 19, continues in chapter 28, verse 9. Our Haftarah portion this week was taken out of the book of Malachi, verse 1 through 1, verse 1 to 2, 7, and the British portion is taken out of the book of Romans, chapter 9, verses 1 through 13. And the question is, well, what genealogy do we belong to? Are we really of Isaac's genealogy? See, this is the question that our parashah brings out this week. Our parashah opens up with a statement with the distinction between generations in Genesis 25, 19 through 26. Now, these are the genealogies of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took for himself Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, to be his wife. Isaac prayed to Adonai on behalf of his wife because she was barren. Adonai answered his plea, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant, but the children struggled with one another inside her, and she said, "If it's like this, why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of Adonai, and Adonai said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from your body will be separated. One will be stronger than the other people, and the older will serve the younger." You notice that God makes a distinction that Isaac is the only descendant from Abraham. And we all know from reading the Torah that Abraham actually fathered Ishmael as well. And Ishmael was the older son. But Isaac is the one in which the genealogy that God considers righteous and holy comes out of. Then it quickly turns from the genealogy of Isaac to Isaac's wife, Rebekah, who is presented as the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, who was the descendant of Sarah's family, Isaac's mother. You remember in last week's parashah we found the significance of the women who would become Isaac's wife. For she must be like unto Sarah, the mother of all the faithful. And we see many similarities between Rebekah and Sarah, as well as Isaac and Abraham. Sarah was barren until the Lord opened up her womb, just as Rebekah was barren until the Lord opens up her womb. And like Abraham, God performs this act because the call and petition of Isaac. But this is where the physical parallels end and a spiritual parallel begin. I say this because of the two children within the womb of Rebekah, that Adonai has declared they are distinct people. They are not the same. They may be twins in a physical sense, but they are truly not twins. They are not that alike. And it's shown by the way of their distinct facial features and so forth. Esau comes out reddish and hairy. They say and this is why he's named Esau, for the red. And he looks totally different from Jacob. Jacob is smooth and light-skinned and smaller. There's a big distinction between the two, despite the fact that they were both conceived at the same time and the fact that they were both born at the same time. The younger will be served by the older. This is like unto Abraham's two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael was older than Isaac, yet it is Isaac the younger who inherits the promise of God. God tells Rebekah that they will be separated from each other because of the call and the purpose of each of them. This is similar to Sarah casting Hagar and Ishmael out from the camp of Abraham, as it will be Isaac that God has chosen to carry the promise. The question really becomes why God embraces the younger son and rejects the other, despite the fact traditionally in ancient Near Eastern culture it is the firstborn son who receives all the rights and privileges of inheritance. And the answer we find is found in verses 27 through 28 of chapter 25. And when the boys grew up, Esau became a man knowledgeable in hunting an outdoorsman, while Jacob was a mild man, remaining in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau, but because he had a taste for wild game. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Jacob was mild. Jacob was teachable. Jacob was civil. Whereas Esau was wild and stubborn. From this we can see the two distinct nations that will arise from the seed of Isaac. One who is worldly and selfish, trusting only in what can be accomplished through physical strength and effort, whereas the other understood the need to honor God and family. You can see that by this time in Isaac's life, his relationship with the Lord is not as well as it should be, as the Torah declares that Isaac had a taste for wild game, in contrast to the statement that Rebekah loves Jacob because he's a mild man at heart. Now understand, Isaac was 60 years old when these children were born. And by this time that this statement was made, he's now about 90 years old. Now we can see what is the effect of having the two different sons on Isaac's heart. Isaac favors Esau. Why? Esau is a man's man. Yeah. Esau's tough, rough. He's physically strong. He's adept at doing hunting. He makes a good provider, therefore. But isn't this similar to Abraham and Ishmael? Abraham had been with Ishmael for almost 13 years when Isaac was born. Ishmael was growing strong. He was a man's man. This is why Abraham hated to put him away. But he had to make the distinction. But we see here that Isaac is not making that choice. Isaac still favors Esau, despite what he knows of his responsibility as the progenitor of the covenant of Abraham. Jacob is totally different. Does it mean that Jacob is not as manly as Esau? No. But Jacob is more disciplined and more settled than Esau. Like God, we have to look at the heart instead of the body. This is so prevalent in our culture today. The obsession with the body and appearances that most people never see the true person before them. If we compare Esau and Jacob, we find that this is the perfect parallel to our world standards today. Esau is favored. Why? Because he's strong, robust, skilled in the manly art of hunting, which would make him an excellent provider and a handsome man. Yet, he lacks the qualities that Jacob has that make Jacob more preferable. Esau may be socially adept because he seeks to please his father, and that he can make his place among the other men in the world. He's the perfect man's man, according to the world standards. And when we look at anything in the media or anything in our culture today, it's all about physical strength, looks, and having the right social structure. That breeds success in this world. So according to the Torah, Esau is a successful man according to world standards. But let's look at Jacob. Jacob is mild-mannered. He's studious. He's family-oriented. And he's religiously motivated. He is a homebody who honors his mother as well as his father. One of the things that's not mentioned about Esau, Esau honors his father only and not his mother. So he has no value in women. Jacob honors his mother as well as his father and values the idea of his heritage. He sees it as something worthy. He is the epitome of what one would call today a square or a nerd in society. Scripture depicts Esau as the typical selfish, self-satisfying person who has no use for the value of tradition or heritage, and this is why his birthright has no value in him in chapter 25, verses 29 through 34. And we read the narrative that Jacob cooked a stew. When Esau came in from the field, he was exhausted. And so Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me some of this really red stuff. I am exhausted." And that is why he is called Edom. So Jacob said, "Sell your birthright to me today." And Esau said, "Look, I'm about to die. Of whatever use is this to me, a birthright?" And Jacob said, "Make a pledge to me now." And so he made a pledge to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and then got up and left. And the Torah records that so Esau despised his birthright. What is so important about this birthright? The birthright not only gives him the right to be the next in line for control over the family after their father's death, but it also designates who will be the one who continues in the covenant made with Abraham by God. This should be a thing of immeasurable value to someone who has faith and belief in God and in their family. But then again, this shows the heart of Esau towards God. This is why God declared that Jacob he loved, but Esau he hated. Jacob desired to have that birthright. Jacob understood the value of the birthright. We always hear about Jacob the supplanter, Jacob the trickster, Jacob who did this and deception to this. But wait a minute, what about when Jacob becomes Israel? Jacob doesn't stay Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel. And Israel is a prince of God. Israel is one who has struggled with God and has overcome. So Jacob has struggled with his own self and overcome it in order to be what God has called him and chosen him to be. And this is why even in his youth, he understands the value of the birthright. We understand then that Jacob must have a relationship with God, or at least a fear and a reverence for God, for he desires the birthright. Esau has no fear of God. Esau has no reverence for God. Esau is happy as long as he can roam the fields and be strong. We find later on that Esau takes 2 wives from the land of Canaan. That's what God said not to do. But Esau doesn't care, because Esau was led by his own selfish wants, his desires, his lust. But yet, here's the dichotomy. Both Esau and Jacob come from Isaac's loins. And both of their mothers is a righteous woman. And yet, from a righteous couple come 2 completely different children. One who becomes the righteousness of Israel, and one who becomes the cursed of God. But yet Esau wants the blessing of his father before he dies. He's given up his birthright, but yet he wants that blessing, because the blessing holds special significance. It can override the birthright because it was given directly by the father. And see, the birthright in and of itself has no value to him. He doesn't care about being the religious head of the family. He doesn't care about any of that. What he cares about is what comes from the blessing. What he receives out of that is the inheritance of 2/3 of his father's estate. He will be a rich man. Jacob, as being the second-born, would only receive 1/3 of that estate, and therefore he would not be a rich man, but one who would have to struggle to build himself up. And yet, we find that Isaac is portrayed in this scene as physically blind by now. But in reality, he is just as spiritually blind as he is physically blind. Why? Because Isaac should have remembered when God has spoken to Rebekah about the children, that the younger would serve the older. He should have understood the clue that God gave him about his own life. Compared to his older brother Ishmael, he was the younger, but yet Isaac would be served by Ishmael. And yet he has forgotten all these things. So that tells me he has become spiritually blind, that he has not only waned physically in his eyesight, but his discernment of the things of God have become clouded and jaded. And he desires to give the son that it gives him the most pleasure, the birthright, because it pleased him and not God. And this is part of the dichotomy. How come Abraham went through his entire life, his father, and knew that it may not have been his great pleasure to put Ishmael aside, but he understood what God had required of him. And he took great joy in the fact that Isaac was chosen, and that Isaac was truly of his loins between him and Sarah. And therefore Abraham ensured that nothing could interfere with Isaac receiving the promise. And yet here we find in Isaac's old age, around the same old age as Abraham was when he was being promised to the birth of Isaac, that he has become so spiritually blinded that he would rather pass on what he knows is God's command to one who is not worthy instead of to the one whom God has chosen. But Rebekah has not forgotten the promise. That's part of being that perfect helpmeet that people say about a husband and wife. When one becomes forgetful of what's really true, the other can stand up for what's right and make it come to pass. Rebekah intervenes, and unlike Isaac, she has not become blind to the will of God. She takes steps to bring it to pass. And even though Jacob is not perfect, as his name suggests, it is he in whom God has called to fulfill his purpose, as he possesses the qualities within him that are needed to answer and endure the call of God. And this is the point that God makes with Israel in Malachi 1:1 through 3. An oracle, the word of Adonai to Israel by Malachi. I love you, says Adonai. But you say, how have you loved us? And was not Esau Jacob's brother? Is it the declaration of Adonai? Yet I loved Jacob, and Esau I hated. I made his hills a wasteland, and I gave his inheritance to the jackals of the wilderness. You are the descendants of Jacob. How can you tell me that I don't love you? I loved your grandfather, and I have brought you forth because of the love for him, and therefore I love you. How can you say that I have not loved you? God loves those that choose to follow him. And like Jacob chose to follow God, he valued God and the things of God. And this is what compels God's affection for Jacob and his hatred of Esau. We see that Jacob takes a wife from his mother's homeland, as God has instructed. Jacob is willing to work for that what he loves. Jacob is willing to do what God has told him to do. And this is why at that critical point, Jacob wrestles with himself and becomes Israel. Israel is a continuation of that genealogy of Isaac, and whom God has chosen and loved. Yet they were living more like Esau at this time, and thus the Lord rebukes them and attempts to try to compel them to repentance by revealing the sin against him as opposed to his presence of protection over them. And it continues in Malachi 1:6 through 7. A son honors his father, and a servant his master. So if I am father, where is my honor? If I am a master, where is my reverence? Says Adonai Zebaot. You Kohanim who despise my name. But you say, how did we despise your name? By offering defiled bread on my altar. But you say, how did we defile you? When you say the table of Adonai is despicable. The firstborn, the birthright, goes to that one that intercedes between God and the people. And that is the Kohanim when it comes to Israel. But the Kohanim at this time were not honoring God. They were offering sacrifices that were lame and sick and diseased. They were taking bribes. And they were doing all these things in the name of God. They were despising the birthright that the Lord had given them. They had become like Esau. God responds to them with the statement that he would rather not even have a sacrifice at all if the heart attitude of the Kohanim is not right when they offer it. As Malachi 1:10 states, if just one of you would shut the doors and not light my altar uselessly, I have no delight in you, says Adonai Zebaot, nor will I accept any offering from your hand. Why? Because he is worthy of respect and reverence from those he has chosen to be his servants, the Levites. They offer sacrifices before the Lord that are lame or sick or the result of plunder from battle. These are not the first fruits of the flock, the unblemished that the Lord demands and expects. They have become resentful in their duties, seeking self-satisfaction and self-gain from their position. The attitude of humility and value in the position Adonai has appointed them is gone. Malachi 1:12 through 13 and 14b state, but you are profaning it when you say the table of Adonai is defiled. As for its fruit is despicable. But you also say, it's tedious, and you sniff at it, says Adonai Zebaot. And so you bring plunder, the lame, the sick, and you bring them as an offering. Should I accept this from your hand, says Adonai? For I am a great king, says Adonai Zebaot, and my name shall be revered among the nations. Like Esau, whom Adonai hated, he will reject and curse these from the house of Levi, only to accept those who respond properly to the blessing of the birthright that Adonai has given them as priests before the people and the Lord. And we find in Malachi 2, 3 through 7, behold, I am rebuking the seed on account of you, and you will spread dung on their faces, the dung of your festivals, and take you away together with it. But then you will know that I have sent this command to you to be my covenant with Levi, says Adonai Zebaot. My covenant was with him for life and shalom, and I gave them to him for reverence. And so he reverenced me, and he was awestruck by my name. Instructions of truth were in his mouth, and justice was not found in his lips. And shalom and uprightness he walked with me, and he turned many from iniquity. From a Cohen's lips should guard knowledge, and instruction must be sought from his mouth, for he is a messenger of Adonai Zebaot. It's the importance of the birthright, the proper following of the generations. It is the difference between those who are of Esau and those who are from Jacob. They are two different priests, just like they were two different nations. They were the priests who were selfish, self-satisfying, self-glorifying, and they were allowing the people to fall into sin and despair. And they were the priests who are the true house of Levi, who were instructing the people properly and guarding the truth of God and continuing a generation that could be raised up to follow the one true God. You know, we can even find this example today in ministry. The Esau's of the ministry who only desire what benefits them in the service of God. And then there are the Jacobs who truly value being the servant of the Lord, as their hearts are humble in obedience toward the Lord. and his things despite the cost to them. In Malachi, the idea of God's choice and call is irrevocable, and that despite those who may in the flesh be from Israel, they are not Israel. In fact, they are more like Esau than Israel. You notice God uses the direct term of his name, Adonai Zavaot, the Lord of hosts, the Lord who commands the greatest of armies. In other words, you can never defeat him, and yet you treat him as if he is nothing. And yet he has given you such a high position, he's given you such a blessed call, that you have the privilege of being his servant, and yet they were despised. They called it tedious, despicable. They were not worthy to bear the call in the name of Kohanim. And this is why not everyone who is from Israel is Israel. And this is the distinction that Paul makes in Romans 9, 6 through 8. This should apply to us especially. But it is not as though the word of the God has failed. For not all those who are descended from Israel are Israel. Just because someone calls himself a Jew does not make him Israel. And it doesn't mean that God has failed in bringing forth the nation of Israel, because from it he has brought his plan forth to fruition. Nor are they all children because they are Abraham's seed. Rather, your seed shall be called through Isaac. Again, a looking back and paralleling of Abraham having two children that were of his seed, Ishmael and Isaac. But which one was the ones that God called forth to follow them? That was from the seed of Isaac. So a lot of the Jews would say, well, our father's Abraham. Well, so what? Are you following your father Abraham where you would become the son of Isaac? That is, it is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as seed. Flesh and blood does not always a relative make, especially in God's eyes. It is as those who possess the faith, humility, and obedience in God and his promise that are truly the seed of Abraham and the genealogy of Isaac. Paul uses the obedience and faith of both Sarah and Rebekah to believe that God would bring forth the seed of promise from their wombs to illustrate how the generations of the faithful came to be. It is through faith that these sons came forth. It wasn't any of action that a man did in and of his own self or his own seed, but it was that of God himself. The children of God through Messiah Yeshua become the seed that follows Isaac. Romans 9, 9 through 16. For the word of promise is this: at this time I will come, and Sarah will have a son. It's not when you want it to happen. It's not how you want it to happen. But I will tell you it will happen. And why? Because when I come back again this year, you will have that son. And not only this, but also Rebekah having twins from one act with our father Isaac. Isaac prayed to have her womb opened up. And not only did God answer him, but he gave him a double blessing. He gave him two sons. And out of those two sons, one is the son of promise. Yet before the sons were even born and had not done anything, good or bad, so that God's purpose and choice might stand, not because of works, because of him who calls. It was said to her, the older shall serve the younger. It's not for you to choose. God chooses whom he wants. God looks at the heart. He doesn't look at the person. The older shall serve the younger. Again, the fact that God made the decision who would really be was considered the firstborn in God. They put God first. As it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. What shall we say then? There is no injustice with God, is there? May it never be. Is God unjust because he chooses whom he wants? Or is God justified because he knows something we don't? For to Moses he says, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. Did he not show mercy to the nation of Israel when they acted like they were heathens in the wilderness? Mm-hmm. Did he not have compassion on them? And instead of destroying all of them, he only allowed the generation that was so rebellious to die off in the wilderness, and that the children of that generation could be raised up to become those who would continue forth as the seed of Isaac. It's God's choice. God is the chooser of all things according to his plan. But see, what is our responsibility? Our reaction and our obedience to that call is what determines if we really belong to the genealogy of Isaac or Esau. Do we hold in esteem the things of this world, or do we esteem the privileges of his choice and his calling? Remember, both came from the same womb. Both had the same chance to have the call, but only one received it. The one who valued that which God had promised more than he valued anything else. So when we say we are called of God, and when we say that we have chosen the Lord, have we chosen him in that respect to where it doesn't matter whether we accomplish greatness in the world according to the world standards, but that we accomplish what God has called us to do in his standard. The greatest accomplishment of Isaac was Jacob. That's it. Unlike Abraham, he didn't do these 10 terrific tests and all these other things. His greatest moment was his birth of his son Isaac. His claim to fame is not much, is it? And when we look at Jacob, look how many times that Jacob, we say, could have been walking the wrong way for God, but yet God knew what the end result would be. And Jacob said that as long as he knew God was walking with him, he would follow God. And he did. And because of that, he becomes Israel. And he bears forth 10 sons, who out of the 10 sons will bring forth the greatest son of Abraham, Messiah Yeshua. Because he chose the value over the greater thing than the value of earthly things. That is the generations of Isaac. So, my question, like I say, is, are you of the seed of Isaac? Are you of the seed of Esau? Shabbat Shalom.